We will not forget the history written by our blood till the end of the world. O our fallen heroes, you gave your lives for the revolution. These are the opening lines of the revolutionary anthem, We Shall Not Surrender Till the End of the World, well known and often sung by protesters in Myanmar. They were written in 1988, the same year a national uprising against military dictatorship was viciously crushed. And yet these lyrics are still relevant today, as another struggle for democracy unfolds in Myanmar, echoing the same relentless spirit of resistance, even though protesting has historically proven to be a life-and-death endeavor in the country. In charge of the country's current revolution, the tech-savvy, pragmatic, and audacious Generation Z, colloquially known as Gen Z. But this time, the young people of Myanmar are doing more than protesting. The New Age Gen Z rebels have replaced protest signs with makeshift weapons, revolutionary anthems with battle cries, and organization meetings in major cities with secluded jungle camps. That's right, the Gen Z rebels in Myanmar have escalated their protesting to guerrilla warfare, dying for democracy, but now also taking the lives of the country's ruthless military forces with them. And against all odds, it's these Gen Z rebels that currently have the upper hand. But can they keep it? Can Gen Z rebels truly prevail in the brutal Myanmar civil war? We've got the answer to this question, and many others, in this video. Now, we could give you a yes, no, or maybe answer straight away and be done with it. But the story of the Myanmarese Gen Z rebels is so fascinating that it deserves a proper telling. That's why several Western journalists have visited Myanmar, risking their lives just for a chance to meet these rebels and learn what drives them. So before answering the titular question, let's meet these fascinating rebels and answer some other questions their efforts might raise for you in the process. Of course, the first question is, how did we get here? Why did the Myanmarese Gen Z take up arms against the oppressive regime in the first place? The truth is that the current revolution in Myanmar didn't start as an armed insurgency. It started as a series of peaceful protests against a military coup that ended a brief period of democratic rule in the country. On February 1, 2021, the military of Myanmar, known as the Tatmadaw, seized power, detaining elected leaders including Aung San Suu Kyi, who played a vital role in Myanmar's transition from a military junta to partial democracy. This transition took place in 2011, barely a decade ago, and the sudden and brutal interruption of the democratic processes sparked outrage across the nation. The people of Myanmar, particularly the younger generation who grew up in a near democracy and tasted the sweet fruits of freedom, took to the streets in massive numbers, engaging in peaceful demonstrations. The initial protests were characterized by nothing more than unity and creativity. Protesters used social media to organize and spread their message by deploying tactics like flash mobs and symbolic acts of resistance. For instance, the three-finger salute, originally seen in the popular dystopian novel series The Hunger Games, became a powerful symbol of resistance and unity among the protesters. But just like in The Hunger Games, the powers that be responded with ruthless force. The Tatmadaw unleashed a wave of brutal crackdowns, using live ammunition, tear gas, and water cannons against the unarmed civilians, in addition to beating them into submission. The streets, once filled with hopeful chants, were now stained with blood. The scene echoed the lyrics of We Shall Not Surrender Till the End of the World, which laments the civilian corpses lying on the road. Excessive force against civilians was used as early as February 9th, just 8 days after the February 1st coup d'etat. By March, dozens of protesters were killed daily by authorities, with the bloodiest day, March 3rd, claiming 38 lives. Among the dead was the fierce 19-year-old Kyaw Sin, known as Angel, who wore a t-shirt that read "Everything will be okay" on that fateful day. She was also filmed defiantly shouting, "We won't run," and "Blood must not be shed." But it seemed that Angel might have anticipated the outcome of her protesting. She left details of her blood type, a contact number, and a request to donate her body in the event of her death prior to being shot in the head by the Tatmadaw. Angel became another symbol of resistance, with hundreds of people attending her funeral. As April came, things in Myanmar became only bloodier. Tatmadaw started firing grenades at protesters, killing over 80 civilians in a single day, now referred to as the Bago Massacre. As the death toll rose, it became clear the Tatmadaw was willing to go to any lengths to maintain its grip on power. It's the sheer brutality of the regime that pushed the Gen Z protesters to rethink their approach. They soon realized simple civilian disobedience was no longer enough. Neither were social media posts or symbolic gestures. It was time to fight back. So a faction of the young protesters retreated to the jungle, where they joined ethnic armed groups or formed their own militias and started doing just that, fighting back. Fighting for democracy against the very regime that took it from them. Officially, the Myanmar Civil War started on May 5, 2021. This is when the People's Defense Force, an armed wing of the pro-democracy National Unity Government, was formed. So now that we know the two sides of the Myanmar civil war, let's take a look at them in more detail. On one side, we have the State Administration Council, aka the military junta, currently governing Myanmar. As we've already mentioned, Tatmadaw is its military, composed of the Myanmar Army, the Myanmar Navy, and the Myanmar Air Force. According to the Global Firepower Index, Tatmadaw has 150,000 active personnel, 20,000 reservists, and about 55,000 paramilitary forces. On the other side, the National Unity Government awaits, primarily fighting through the People's Defence Force, or PDF for short. According to the government's statements, the PDF is divided into 5 regional commands: Northern, Southern, Central, Eastern, and Western. Each of these commands mounts at least 3 brigades consisting of 5 battalions divided into 4 companies. The units are given a 6-week basic military training before they're sent into battle. These recruits usually join existing ethnic groups that have been fighting the military for a while, such as the Karen National Liberation Army, or KNLA. More importantly, the recruits include members of the ethnic Bamar majority population, which has traditionally been part of the Myanmar Army. When the PDF was first formed, it had only about 8,000 soldiers, primarily consisting of Myanmarese youth and pro-democracy activists. However, this number continued rising at a mind-blowing rate, reaching 65,000 in November 2022. As of February 2024, it's believed that the PDF is some 100,000 people strong, though not all of them are fully armed and trained. The mere fact that the number of pro-democracy fighters rose by over 1,000% in a relatively short period speaks volumes about the widespread support for this movement, which the regime labels as terrorist. The support the opposing sides receive is also one of the major differences between them. Sure, the Gen Z rebels fighting for their country are massively popular among the people of Myanmar. However, they have still received little to no international assistance. When asked about the lack of international support by a journalist who spent time with the Gen Z rebels, one of the young commanders had this to say: "We are just like the people in America, the people in Europe. We're fighting for the same values. Democracy." He added, "We are the same. We are all human, and yet they've forgotten us." So far, the United Nations and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations haven't taken any major steps to support the resistance, or at least prevent the regime's barbaric acts. There have been some statements and bold declarations, but they remain just that: words. That's why some protesters could be seen carrying a sign saying, "How many dead bodies are needed for the UN to take action?" At the same time, the brutal military regime in power is supported by 2 of the most powerful nations in the world, China and Russia. The 2 countries, well familiar with violent autocracy, have been supplying the deeply unpopular Myanmar military with the weapons necessary to counter the rebels. This leads us to the next major difference between the 2 opposing parties in the Myanmar civil war: the armament. As of 2024, the Myanmarese regime has a $2.7 billion defense budget. In contrast, the Gen Z rebels primarily fund their effort through donations sent by their supporters. As you can probably imagine, the difference in financing has resulted in a stark difference in the weaponry both sides wield. On the one hand, you have the regime with over 200 naval assets, over 700 tanks, and almost 300 aircraft. On the other, there are the Gen Z rebels buying their weapons on the black market or customizing commercial drones to create their own makeshift air force. But remember, it's the Gen Z rebels that currently have the upper hand, so let's see how they do it. Though the Myanmar military boasts significant resources across all categories, most of the fighting in the civil war has been done through its air force. The air force has been used for some truly vile acts, such as attacking a village in April 2023 and killing 168 people, including 30 children. The Tatmadaw's over-reliance on air defense forced the Gen Z rebels to adapt and innovate. They began purchasing commercial drones and customizing them by outfitting them with explosives. The customization part involves 3D printers that produce the necessary components using templates found online. And all of this usually takes place in makeshift workshops in underground bunkers. From this description alone, it's clear that the Myanmar Revolution is the perfect mix of idealism and innovation. Of course, there's also some of that recognizable Gen Z spirit. You see, the live feed from the drones that have conducted successful strikes on the regime is edited into videos set to pumping heavy metal music, sending a clear message: you've messed with the wrong generation. The journalists also had the chance to witness the repair of one of the rebels' more powerful drones, which had previously been used to spray crops. The model was refitted with mortars and test-flown soon afterward. The only issue with these ingenious inventions is the military's jamming systems that prevent the drones from operating inside the cities. These systems are what prevented the newly converted drone we just mentioned from striking a military outpost with some 80 soldiers a few days after the test launch. The drone was seen approaching the outpost, climbing to some 300 feet, but then began going in circles. The rebels managed to fly the drone back to base, where they had already started brainstorming new ways to overcome this hurdle. As one of the Gen Z commanders puts it, they have fighter jets and tanks, we just have our spirit. So despite being massively outgunned by the regime, the Gen Z rebels refuse to back down. But who are these courageous rebels? What are their stories? Believe it or not, most of them had no military experience before joining the resistance. What's more, most of them had never even held a gun before the 2021 coup. These rebels are former artists, doctors and nurses, teachers, railroad workers, and students. Here are just a few of the incredibly brave Gen Z rebels that journalists got to know by name. Maui, nicknamed after the Moana character from Disney, used to be an organic farmer. Now he serves as the deputy commander of the Karenni Nationalities Defense Force, an armed insurgent group consisting of 10,000 soldiers and primarily fighting the 66th Light Infantry Division of the Myanmar Army. He was quoted as saying, "We the people of Myanmar are not waiting. With or without international support, we must end this war." Ko Kant used to work in digital marketing in Yangon before joining the protests and subsequently the insurgents. Interestingly, his whole body is a tribute to the struggle, as he is covered in tattoos. Across his fingers there's a single word, revolution. On his chest there's an image of the jailed politician Aung San Suu Kyi, a Nobel Peace Prize laureate seen as a symbol of democratic hope in Myanmar. But on his arm there's a tattoo of a flower emerging from the barrel of a gun, suggesting that one day he won't have to fight anymore. But this day, he says, will only come if the youth of Myanmar get their freedom back. As Ko Kant puts it, we just requested them to give us back our future, but they didn't listen. We want freedom. Then there's Cobra, a martial arts fighter turned commander in Loi Khor, typically sporting flip-flops and shorts. He served with many other young rebels who have been killed during the fighting, but doesn't seem to let this dissuade him from fighting on. In his words, all of these guys gave their lives. We are fighting for our future. We'll keep going for sure. From these descriptions alone, you can already tell that Myanmar's Gen Z rebels don't look like typical soldiers. You probably won't be surprised to learn that they don't act as typical soldiers either. In the evening after a full day of fighting, they will gather around a campfire and play music, essentially trading their AK rifles for guitars. Music is a huge part of the rebels' lives, with one of the units, Cobra Column, even having its own heavy metal anthem to celebrate its victories. But perhaps the most Gen Z thing about these rebels is that some of them actually assembled a secret command post in Loi Khor because the township still had Wi-Fi access, thanks to Elon Musk's Starlink. Unfortunately, like many Gen Zers around the world, a few members of the unit were so engrossed in their internet browsing that they didn't escape in time when an armed drone attacked their post, injuring several of them in the process. But as unorthodox as these Gen Z fighters are, their reasons for joining the struggle are certainly no laughing matter. According to the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, the Myanmar Civil War is the most violent of all the 50 conflicts it's currently tracking. Since the 2021 coup, at least 50,000 people have been killed in the country, with 8,000 of them being civilians. Another 26,500 people have been detained for opposing the junta, according to the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners, Burma. By the end of 2023, over 2.6 million people had been driven from their homes due to the fighting, almost 5% of the country's total population, according to the UN Human Rights Office. The same human rights group says that before the coup, only 1 million people required humanitarian assistance in Myanmar. Now, over 18 million of them are in desperate need of humanitarian aid. These numbers alone reiterate the fact that the junta will stop at nothing to retain power. Their goal is not for the people of Myanmar to love them, but to fear them enough to submit willingly. That's why the regime seemingly has no problem with even killing children, as we've already mentioned. In February 2024, a military fighter jet struck a school while it was full of students in Dorsi I village. Luckily, most of the students managed to take cover in a previously dug-out trench. Unfortunately, 4 of them didn't. When you learn that the regime doesn't refrain from targeting children outright, it shouldn't come as a surprise that it also burns entire villages to the ground, launches airstrikes on hospitals, and severs electricity throughout the country. The Myanmar people already resented the Myanmar military, primarily owing to the violent response to the 1988 and 2007 revolutions. The first uprising alone claimed between 3,000 and 10,000 lives. However, it seems that the 2021 coup and the junta's resulting actions have truly united the entire country against the evil that is the Myanmar military. The people have been finally seeing the Tatmadaw for what it really is, the biggest obstacle to achieving peace in the country. That's why the National Unity Government declared the Tatmadaw an insurgent organization that terrorizes and murders peaceful civilians. As such, the Tatmadaw can in no way be part of the new Myanmar the rebels are seeking to build. But will they be able to pull it off? Can ill-equipped Gen Z rebels with minimal military experience truly take down a brutal regime funded by the likes of China and Russia? They can, but they can't do it alone. Currently, the resistance controls more than half of Myanmar. However, the regime still holds the biggest cities. The Gen Z rebels are mostly based in remote and rural areas, relying on guerrilla tactics to evade the regime's superior firepower. However, even under current conditions, the rebels have managed to score some major wins. In 2023, they carried out a loosely coordinated nationwide offensive, which allowed them to take control of over 55 towns. One of the most significant among them was Loikor, the capital of the Kaya state, also known as Karenni state. Currently, the rebels hold about 90% of the Kaya state, which means there's still some threat coming from the junta, including in Loikor. The biggest threat comes from the regime's snipers and sudden airstrikes. However, in most places the front lines are so close, in some locations just a few hundred feet apart, that the rebels can actually hear when an attack is about to take place. As one Gen Z rebel puts it, we can hear their soldiers swearing at us before they open fire. For the most part, rebels have been successful in stretching the regime's resources thin by fighting across 8 different battle zones. This approach also prevents the military from taking the divide and conquer approach, i.e. focusing their forces on one area at a time to overwhelm the rebels. The military has also struggled with logistics, having had difficulties carrying out rapid troop deployments. This combination of factors has allowed the resistance to make significant territorial gains. But the problem is that the junta eventually catches up almost every time. As one of the rebels puts it, we can take over towns, but we can't hold them. Take the town of Mayawadi as an example. In April 2024, the KNLA captured the 275 Light Infantry Battalion base some 3 miles west of the town, an area vital to the trade between Thailand and Myanmar. There were also reports that the KNLA managed to capture the town itself, which would have been seen as a major economic defeat for the military regime. However, only 2 weeks later, the Myanmar military was back, sharing a photo of its soldiers at the site raising the military's flag. This incident, as well as many others, serves as a grim reminder that this is still a David versus Goliath fight. For David to prevail in our story, the rebels need more weapons and more international support. The single most pressing piece of equipment they need is anti-aircraft weaponry, which would help them defend their bases against the regime's devastating airstrikes. Plus, the rebels need more people. Sure, their numbers have grown exponentially since the beginning of the civil war, but the military isn't trailing too far behind. The regime has introduced a new conscription order for 2024, aiming to raise 5,000 recruits every month. Interestingly, this move has somewhat backfired, as many people decided to join the rebels due to this order. Still, the order serves as a clear sign that the junta is determined to fight back. Together with its existing firepower, the potential new manpower poses a formidable challenge to the rebels' efforts to maintain their gains and continue their resistance. The military also has a large network of bases to retreat into, as well as notable arms production facilities to sustain the war effort. And let's not forget, the military has no issue burning Myanmar to the ground if it means defeating its enemies. As an independent Myanmar analyst, David Scott Matheson, told international media outlet DW, this is a regime that's always seen scorched earth tactics as ordinary behavior, not an extreme measure. But unsurprisingly, the rebels aren't afraid. Many of them are prepared to fight until their dying breath. With sheer grit and determination, they've managed to raise unprecedented awareness, fundamentally transform the country's political psyche, and inspire the entire population to dream of a more democratic society that will shed its military junta legacy once and for all. The joint goal is clear and summed up by one of the rebels: the military dictatorship must end in our era. But what do you think? Will the inspiring Gen Z rebels be able to see their goal through? And if so, who do you see coming to their rescue with the much-needed weapons, equipment, and people? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Now go and check out who will win America's second civil war, or click this other video instead.